We now move on to the uterus. Now, the uterus is basically shaped like an inverted pear, tapering inferiorly to the cervix, and in its non pregnant state, it's situated entirely within the pelvis. It's hollow and has thick muscular walls. Its maximum external dimensions are approximately 7.5 centimeters long, 5 centimeters wide, and 3 centimeters thick. An adult uterus weighs approximately 70 grams. In the upper part, the uterus is termed the body or the corpus. The area of insertion of each fallopian tube is called the cornu, and I'm going to show you the cornu in another picture. This one, can you see the cornu here? This is the lateral cornu. So, cornu is the area where there is the insertion of each fallopian tube, and that part of the body above the cornu is called the fundus. So the part of the uterus above this cornu where the insertion of the fallopian tube is, it's called the fundus. The uterus tapers to a small constricted area, and that is called as the isthmus. The uterus tapers to a small constricted area that we call the isthmus. Here you can see the isthmus. Um, and below this is the cervix. So below the isthmus is basically your cervical canal or the cervix. The the cervix basically projects obliquely into the vagina. The longitudinal axis of the uterus is approximately at right angle to the vagina and normally tilts forward. So normally it's tilting forward, and this is called anteversion. So this is the normal position where the uterus is tilted forward. It's called the anteversion. So it's anteverted. Can you see this purple one? Now, in addition, the long axis of the cervix is really the same as the long axis of the uterus. Obviously, the long axis of the uterus is not the same as the long axis of the cervix, right? If I draw a line here and I draw a line here, they're not in the same axis. And the uterus is also flexed forward on itself as the isthmus. Can you see that the uterus itself is also flexed forward at the isthmus area? Right? However, in about 20% of women, the uterus is tilted backwards. When I say it's tilted backwards, it's either retroverted or retroflexed. This is the retroversion and this is the retroflexed version. It's important to see here that there's no pathological significance in most women because of retroversion, but retroversion is whenever retroversion happens, it's that it's fixed and it's immobile, and this may be associated with endometriosis. So this has relevance with the gynecological history and surgery, and we'll refer to it again when we do the gynecological history examination investigations. The cavity of the uterus is the shape of an inverted triangle. If you look at the cavity of the uterus, this is the shape of an inverted triangle, as you can see. And when sectioned coronally, the fallopian tubes open at lateral angles. That's also fairly imaginable. The constriction at the isthmus, I'm going back to the image. This is a really good image because you can see the isthmus here, you can see the fundus here, you can see the cornu here, and those are three important parts when we're talking about anatomy. The cavity of the uterus is the shape of an inverted triangle, and when sectioned coronally, the fallopian tubes open at lateral angles. So you can see the lateral cornu here. The constriction at the isthmus, where the corpus joins the cervix, is called the anatomical os. So can you see there's an internal os here and there's an external os here? Anatomically, the os is present where the constriction of the isthmus, the constriction at the isthmus where the corpus joins the cervix is called the anatomical os. Seen microscopically, the site of the histological internal os is where the mucous membrane of the isthmus becomes that of the cervix. Now, when we talk about the internal os is where, if you see it microscopically, this is the area histologically where the mucous membrane of the isthmus becomes that of the cervix. Okay? This is the best I could do if I tried to find a coronal section of this in order to show you the isthmus part that I was talking about. So, seen microscopically, the site of the histological internal os is where the mucous membrane of the isthmus becomes that of the cervix. Ahead of the internal os is the mucous membrane of the cervix. The uterus consists of three layers: the outer serous layer, peritoneum, the middle muscular layer, myometrium, and the inner mucous layer, endometrium. Remember that the ovary is not covered by the peritoneum, and that's a important exam question that comes up a lot of times. I want to show you this. Now, can you see that the uterus consists of three layers here? The outer serous layer is the peritoneum, and then we have the middle muscular layer, which is the myometrium. Here you can see all this muscular tissue present, and then we have the inner layer, which is the endometrium, right? The inner mucous layer is the endometrium. This is the basalis area and this is the functionalis area. So the endometrium has two parts of it. It's the basalis and functionalis. Now the peritoneum is intimately attached to a subserous fibril layer. This peritoneum is attached to a subserous fibrous layer, except laterally where it spreads out to form the leaves of the broad ligament. Laterally, this has to somehow spread out like a sheath or a fascia or like a covering to form the leaves of the broad ligament. The muscular myometrium forms the main bulk of the uterus, this muscular myometrium, and it's made of interlacing smooth muscle fibers. You can see those smooth muscle fibers here intermingling with areolar tissue, blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatics. Externally, the muscle fibers are mostly longitudinal, but the thicker intermediate layer has interlacing longitudinal, oblique, and transverse fibers. So externally, they're more longitudinal ones, but internally, you have oblique fibers, you have transverse fibers, and you have longitudinal fibers all together. So that's the myometrium. Internally, they're mainly longitudinal and circular. The inner endometrial layer has tubular glands. These are the tubular glands. The inner endometrial layer has tubular glands that dip into the myometrium. These tubular glands, you can see they're almost dipping into this myometrium, right? You can see them here. The endometrial layer is covered by a single layer of columnar epithelial cells, or you can say columnar epithelium, ciliated prior to puberty. So before puberty, it's ciliated. This epithelium is mostly lost due to the effects of pregnancy and menstruation. So before puberty, there's a ciliated layer of endometrium. But after menstruation or pregnancy, this epithelium is mostly lost. The endometrium undergoes cyclical changes during menstruation, and we'll see that when we study chapter 3 of the 10 teachers, where hormonal control of the menstrual cycle and hormonal disorders come in play. We now move on to the cervix. Now the cervix is narrower than the body of the uterus, of course, because it has to narrow down into the vagina. And it's approximately 2.5 centimeter in length. Lateral to the cervix lies cellular connective tissue called the parametrium. And we said that from this parametrium come the uterosacral ligament and the cardinal ligament, which support the upper vault of the vagina. The ureter runs about 1 centimeter laterally to the supravaginal cervix within the parametrium. Remember this. The ureter runs about 1 centimeter laterally to the supravaginal cervix within the parametrium. Okay, and the connective tissue is basically lateral to the cervix lies the cellular connective tissue, which we are calling the parametrium, from which the two ligaments of cardinal ligament and the uterosacral ligament were forming. The posterior aspect of the cervix is covered by the peritoneum of the pouch of Douglas. We said that the pouch of Douglas is also called the uterine pouch and also cul-de-sac, and we were doing the cul-de-sac culdocentesis, where we were removing some fluid to see any abnormality in the fluid. The posterior aspect of the cervix is covered by the peritoneum of the pouch of Douglas, and this continues to the upper part of the vagina. So the upper part of the posterior wall of the vagina forms the anterior wall of the pouch of Douglas. The upper part of the cervix mostly consists of involuntary muscle, whereas the lower part is mostly made of fibrous connective tissue. So this cervix, you can divide it into an upper part and a lower part. The upper part is mainly consisting of the involuntary muscle, and the lower part is consisting mainly of the fibrous connective tissue. The mucous membrane of the cervical canal is called the endocervical canal. Okay, so we call the endocervix the mucous part. This is the mucous membrane of the cervical canal. It has anterior and posterior columns which fold out or radiate to form the arbor vitae. The arbor vitae, basically this area, it has deep glandular follicles. This area has deep glandular follicles that secrete clear alkaline mucus, the main component of physiological vaginal discharge. Okay, if you remember, the Bordolian lactobacilli was creating a acidic environment of 4.5, but here the arbor vitae area, the endocervix, has deep glandular follicles, and these secrete clear alkaline mucus, the main component of physiological vaginal discharge. The epithelium of the endocervix is columnar, and it's also ciliated in its upper two thirds. Let me show that to you. I said that the posterior columns, the mucous membrane of the cervical canal, the endocervix, this part, this endocervix part. I said that this has anterior and posterior columns from which folds radiate out and form the arbor vitae. These are the arbor vitae. Can you see these? I got this image from JP International. So, can you see these arbor vitae? It has numerous deep glandular follicles that secrete clear alkaline mucus, the main component of physiological vaginal discharge. Now, the epithelium of the endocervix. Let's look at that. The epithelium of the endocervix. Can you see that it has cilia and it has columnar cells? So basically, it's ciliated in its upper two thirds. This changes to this cilia. This epithelium changes to stratified squamous epithelium around the region of the external os, and the junction of these two types of epithelium is called the squamo-columnar junction. So this junction is called the squamo-columnar junction. But up ahead of these, this area is ciliated, and it has columnar cells, right? Now, some age changes to anatomy takes place here. The disappearance of maternal estrogens from the circulation after birth causes the uterus to decrease in length by around 1/3 and in weight by around 1/2. So, once maternal estrogens are gone from the circulation after birth, the uterus decreases in length by around 1/3 and in weight by around 1/2. The cervix is then twice the length of the uterus. During childhood, the uterus grows slowly in length in parallel with height and age. The average longitudinal diameter ranges from this cervix, basically, not the cervix, sorry, I'm talking about the uterus. Let's go back to the uterus. Now, let's talk about the uterus. So, when we talk about the uterus, we should see that the disappearance of maternal estrogens from the circulation after birth causes this uterus to decrease in length by around 1/3 and in weight by around 1/2. The cervix is then twice the length of the uterus. But during childhood, the uterus grows slowly in length in parallel with height and age. The average longitudinal diameter is from 2.5 centimeters at the age of 2 years to 3.5 centimeters at the age of 10 years. After the onset of puberty, the anterior, posterior, and transverse diameters of the uterus start to increase, leading to a sharper rise in the volume of the uterus, because the vault of the uterus is slowly increasing, right? The increase in uterine volume continues well after menarche. Menarche is when you get your first period, and the uterus reaches its adult size and configuration by the late teenage years. After the menopause, the uterus atrophies. The mucosa becomes very thin, the glands almost disappear, and the wall becomes relatively less muscular. Now let's talk about the fallopian tubes. Look at this. This is an important picture. It's not very clear, but this is important because it's showing you the interstitial portion also. The rest of the images aren't. The fallopian tubes extend outward from the uterus cornu. I said where the fallopian tube is inserting into the uterus, that area we call the cornu. And above of the cornu, the part of the uterus is called the fundus. At the abdominal ostium, the tube opens into the peritoneal cavity, which is therefore in communication with the exterior of the body via the uterus and the vagina. Remember this. At the abdominal ostium, the tube opens into the peritoneal cavity, which is therefore in communication with the exterior of the body via the uterus and the vagina. This is essential. Why? To allow the sperm and egg to meet. The fallopian tubes convey the ovum from the ovary towards the uterus and promote oxygenation and nutrition for sperm, ovum, and zygote. So fertilization can occur. The fallopian tubes run in the upper margin of the broad ligament known as the mesosalpinx. So the upper margin of the broad ligament is called the mesosalpinx, which encloses this tube so that it is completely covered with peritoneum. This entire tube is covered with peritoneum except for a narrow strip along its inferior aspect. Each tube is about 10 centimeter long and it's described in four parts: interstitial portion, isthmus, ampulla, infundibulum, and some fimbriae. The infundibulum or fimbral portions are sometimes collectively called the infundibulum, sometimes they're differentiated. The interstitial portion lies within the wall of the uterus, while the isthmus is the narrow portion adjoining the uterus. This passes into the widest and longest portion, the ampulla. This in turn terminates in the extremity known as the infundibulum. The opening of the tube into the peritoneal cavity is surrounded by finger-like projections known as fimbria, into which the muscle coat does not extend. The inner surfaces of the fimbria are covered by ciliated epithelium that is similar to the lining of the fallopian tube itself. One of these fimbria is longer than the others and extend to and partially embrace the ovary. So these extend to and partially embrace the ovary. The muscular fibers of the wall of the tube are arranged in inner circular and an outer longitudinal pattern. Okay? So look at this basically. We're talking about the tubular epithelium, which forms a number of branched folds or plicae that run longitudinally. The lumen of the ampulla is almost filled with these folds. The folds have a cellular stroma, but at their bases, the epithelium is only separated from the muscle by a very scanty amount of stroma. There is no submucosa and there are no glands. The epithelium of the fallopian tubes contain two functioning cell types. They contain the ciliated cells, which act to produce constant current of fluid in the direction of the uterus, and the secretory cells. We also have secretory cells here. These secretory cells basically act to contribute to the volume of the tubule fluid. Changes occur under the influence of the menstrual cycle, but there is no cell shedding during menstruation. And we can also see here the thing that I said, that the inner surfaces of the fimbriae are covered by ciliated epithelium. You can see the ciliated epithelium here also. That is similar to the lining of the fallopian tube itself. And I said that the muscular fibers of the wall of the tube are situated such that they're arranged in inner circular. So this is the inner circular muscle layer and an outer longitudinal layer. You can see the outer longitudinal layer here, right? So this is the endosalpinx, this is the myosalpinx, this is the mesosalpinx. This is basically where the entire tube, the tube is covered by this, right? Now we said that the epithelium of the fallopian tubes contains two functioning cell types, the ciliated cells and the secretory cells. And we said that the changes occur under the influence of the menstrual cycle, but there is no cell shedding during menstruation. Now the ovaries. Before we go on to the ovaries, let's just pause here. We now move on to the ovaries. The size and appearance of the ovaries depends on both age and stage of the menstrual cycle. In a child, the ovaries are small structures, approximately 1.5 centimeters long. However, they increase to adult size in puberty due to proliferation of stromal cells and commencing maturation of the ovarian follicles. In the young adult, they are almost almond-shaped and measure approximately 3 centimeters long, 1.5 centimeters wide, and 1 centimeter thick. After the menopause, no active follicles are present and the ovaries become smaller with a wrinkled surface. The ovary is the only intra-abdominal structure that is not covered by peritoneum, and this is very commonly asked in exams. Each ovary is attached to the cornu of the uterus by the ovarian ligament. Remember this, that the ovary is attached to the cornu of the uterus by what? It's attached by the ovarian ligament. And at the hilum, to the broad ligament by the mesovarium. You should also remember this, that at the hilum it's connected at the hilum to the broad ligament by the mesovarium, and the ovary is connected to the cornu of the uterus by the ovarian ligament. So the mesovarium and the ovarian ligament both are connected to the ovary. Now the mesovarium contains the supply of nerves and blood vessels for the ovary. Okay, so for the ovary, you have the mesovarium, which connects its supply of nerves and blood vessels. Laterally, each ovary is attached to the suspensory ligament of the ovary with folds of peritoneum that become continuous with that of the overlying psoas major. Here we can see the suspensory ligament, and what we can also see here is the utero-ovarian ligament, which I was calling the ovarian ligament. This broad ligament, the part of the broad ligament that covers the ovary, is basically the mesovarium. This area of the broad ligament is called the mesovarium. Now here you can see that each ovary is attached to the cornu of the uterus through the ovarian ligament, and at the hilum to the broad ligament by the mesovarium, right? All this is the mesovarium. And then this is the mesovarium contains its supply of nerves and blood vessels. Laterally, each ovary is attached to this suspensory ligament, which goes on and becomes continuous with that of the overlying psoas major muscle. Anterior to the ovaries lie the fallopian tubes. So you can see that this fallopian tube is lying almost anteriorly to the ovary, because the ovary is partially hidden by the fimbriae of the fallopian tube, which attach partially to the ovary. The superior portion of the bladder anterior to the ovaries is also the superior portion of the bladder, and the utero-vesical pouch. Utero-vesical means it's between the uterus and the bladder. Posterior to the ovary lies the ureter, where it runs downwards and forwards in front of the internal iliac artery. Always remember, water under the bridge. So the bridge is the internal iliac artery, and water under the bridge is the ureter. Now the structure of the ovary. The ovary has a central vascular medulla. Now can you see the structure? This is the ovarian structure, right? So the ovary has a central vascular medulla consisting of loose connective tissue containing many elastin fibers and non-striated muscle cells. It has an outer, thicker cortex denser than the medulla. This thicker cortex, this part, is denser than the medulla. You can see that this part is darker than the medulla. It's more dense, right? It's denser than the medulla, consisting of networks of reticular fibers and fusiform cells. Although there is no clear-cut demarcation between the two, the surface of the ovaries is covered by a single layer of cuboidal cells. Remember that. It's covered by a single layer of cuboidal cells, the germinal epithelium. Beneath this is an ill-defined layer of condensed connective tissue called the tunica albuginea. Okay? This is basically the tunica albuginea, which increases in density with age. At birth, there are numerous primordial follicles found in the ovary, mostly in the cortex. You mostly find them in the primordial follicles are found mostly in the cortex, but some are also found in the medulla. These are the follicles that they're showing you. They're mainly found in the cortex. With puberty, some form each month into the Graafian follicles under gonadotrophic control to ovulate and subsequently form corpus luteum or corpus lutea, and ultimately the atretic follicle, the corpora albicans. Right? I'm going to stop here and then commence with the video on bladder, urethra, and ureter.